The air inside the house always smelled the same: dust, old leather, and a faint, sweet hint of hay from the fields carried in on the summer breeze. It was the scent of my childhood, the smell of 300 years of family history. I remember standing in the parlor, the weak afternoon sun highlighting the motes of dust dancing above the worn Persian rug, looking at the faded portrait of great-grandfather Elias. His eyes, just like my father's, just like my own, stared back with a mixture of stubborn pride and quiet worry. That worry, I now realize, wasn't about the weather or the harvest. It was about the impossible math of keeping the Colonial Farm alive. My brother Thomas was the first to call it what it really was. Not a legacy, not an inheritance, but a debt. He said it at Dad's funeral, standing stiffly by the open grave, his expensive city suit looking aggressively out of place against the backdrop of rolling green acres. "It's a magnificent debt, Alex," he'd whispered, his voice dry and devoid of any sentimentality. 300 acres of prime real estate, tied up in antiquated equipment and zero cash flow. It's a beautifully wrapped anchor dragging us all to the bottom. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream that he didn't understand, that the history alone was worth more than his whole Manhattan apartment. But the truth, that bitter, undeniable truth, lodged itself in my throat and wouldn't let me speak. Thomas had left the farm 20 years ago for finance, trading the smell of earth for the cold, sterile air of high-rise offices. He saw numbers. I saw home. But the numbers didn't lie. For the last decade, we'd been bleeding cash. The taxes alone were crippling. The barn roof, dating back to the Revolutionary War, finally gave way last winter, costing us $60,000 we didn't have. Every year, another piece of machinery sputtered out, demanding another impossible repair. Dad had always managed, through sheer grit and a series of increasingly desperate small loans from the local bank, loans he never once told Thomas about. When he died, the full, terrifying scope of the financial mess landed squarely on my shoulders. I was the one who stayed, the one who took over the day-to-day operations. But Thomas, as the elder son, was the executor of the estate, and the farm's ownership, by colonial decree and modern law, was split right down the middle, 50-50. Thomas's solution was simple, brutal, and entirely rational. "Sell it, Alex. We'll split the profits. You can buy a smaller place, maybe start a vineyard, something manageable. This farm is a museum that's draining us dry." He showed me the spreadsheets. The farm was worth $10 million on paper, given the proximity to the city's expanding suburbs. But the outstanding debt, accumulated over decades of poor harvests and necessary infrastructure repairs, was over $4 million. Selling it meant getting maybe $3 million each after all the debts were cleared. It meant losing the Colonial Farm forever, seeing it bulldozed for a housing development named the Colonial Estates, a final, cynical insult to everything it stood for. I couldn't do it. I simply couldn't. I spent 6 months in a state of quiet panic, trying everything I could think of. I looked into farm-to-table cooperatives, local heritage grants, even opening it up as a wedding venue. But everything was too little, too late. The bank's final notice arrived in a stiff, official envelope on a Tuesday morning. We had 90 days. 90 days until they foreclosed, until the auctioneer's gavel struck, and the farm became nothing more than a historical footnote. That day, I finally called Thomas. "I'm going to lose it all," I admitted, the words tasting like ash. His response was a sigh of weary finality. "I know, Alex. Just sign the sale papers. It's the only way to escape the debt." But Thomas didn't know everything. He didn't know about the quiet, gray-suited man who had been visiting the farm sporadically for the past year. Mr. Sterling. He represented a firm called Aetheria Development Corp, a name I'd only ever seen attached to massive, futuristic-looking data centers and pharmaceutical research parks. Sterling had initially wanted to buy the entire property, a hard no from me, which he accepted with surprising grace. He was always incredibly polite, always spoke about the farm with an almost reverent respect that Thomas could never muster. He'd walk the perimeter, not looking at the land as potential real estate, but as a vast, untapped resource. He seemed particularly interested in the eastern quarter, the 50 acres of untouched woodland surrounding the old spring-fed creek. I thought he wanted to build a corporate retreat. I was wrong. It was during our final desperate meeting that Sterling laid his cards on the table. He didn't want the land to develop. He wanted an easement, specifically a permanent restrictive conservation and access easement on those eastern 50 acres. He explained it in calm, measured tones. Aetheria wasn't interested in housing. They were interested in the subterranean bedrock, the quality of the water, and the pristine, undeveloped nature of that specific corner of the property. He assured me the farm itself, the house, the barns, and the remaining 250 acres would remain mine, fully operational. They would simply pay me to ensure that 50 acres would never be developed, and they would have exclusive, subterranean access to a specific geological layer. I had no idea what they were planning, but the terms he offered were stunning. He handed me a single sheet of paper with one number typed on it in bold font. It wasn't a down payment, it was the total price for the easement, clean and clear. $2 million. I stared at the number, the full weight of what Thomas had called our debt crashing down against the sudden, dizzying possibility of salvation. $2 million wouldn't clear the debt entirely, but it would pay off the bank, buy us 2 new tractors, replace the barn roof, and give me a cushion of working capital that would last for years. It was a lifeline. A dangerous, secretive, and potentially life-altering lifeline. I didn't tell Thomas. I couldn't. He would have wanted to know why a major corporation would pay so much for 50 acres of unusable rock and creek. He would have dissected the deal, found the flaw, and forced me to sell the whole farm instead. So I didn't tell him. I signed the papers in secret, receiving the wire transfer 3 days later. It felt illicit, revolutionary, and deeply terrifying all at once. My brother thought I was drowning in a $4 million hole. I had just found 2 million reasons to keep swimming. But what Thomas didn't know, and what I was only beginning to realize, was that a corporate secret bought with $2 million on a Colonial Farm easement wasn't just about rocks and water. It was about something far, far more sinister. The moment the funds cleared, I felt a new kind of dread settle in the pit of my stomach, colder and heavier than any debt. I had saved the farm, but I might have accidentally sold a piece of the world. The immediate relief was intoxicating. I paid off the bank's final demand with a single, massive wire transfer. Watching that $4 million principal balance shrink to nothing felt like shedding a physical weight I'd been carrying since my father's death. I even enjoyed sending Thomas a very brief, cryptic email. Debt problem handled. Farm remains operational. Stop calling me. No explanation, no details. Just a clean, sharp boundary line drawn between his world of finance and my world of soil and silence. For 2 months, I lived in a bubble of blissful, almost manic productivity. I hired a local crew and we fixed the barn roof, the one great-grandfather Elias had complained about in his 1905 diary. I bought 2 new tractors, gleaming red machines that started on the first try. A welcome change from the old diesel behemoths that needed 30 minutes of prayer and percussive maintenance just to sputter to life. I felt like the hero of the family story, the one who didn't let the legacy die. But the bubble didn't last. The money, the $2 million from Aetheria, had bought me freedom from debt, but it also bought me a new kind of chain. The first sign was the arrival of the construction team. I had imagined some quiet geological testing, perhaps a small, almost invisible access point. What I got was a full-scale industrial operation. They erected an 8-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire around the entire 50-acre easement area, patrolled by silent, humorless security guards in black uniforms. The gate had a keypad and a retinal scanner. Just standard security protocol for sensitive infrastructure, Mr. Sterling had explained smoothly over the phone when I called, aghast. We are protecting our investment, Alex, and by extension, yours. Then came the noise. They brought in massive drilling equipment, the kind used for deep core mining, not water table analysis. The constant grinding whine of the drills started at 7 a.m. sharp and didn't stop until 7 p.m. It was a rhythmic, soul-numbing sound that vibrated through the ground, through the old foundations of the farmhouse, and right into my teeth. It scared the livestock, who paced nervously in their pens, and it drove the local wildlife deeper into the woods, abandoning the stream they had relied on for generations. I tried to talk to the project manager, a curt ex-military man named Hayes, who looked at me with the polite, empty eyes of someone following orders he neither understood nor cared about. "We are operating within the boundaries of the easement agreement, Mr. Thorne," he'd repeated, tapping the laminated document I'd signed. "Subterranean access, right to ingress and egress. Minimal surface disruption." He said minimal while standing next to a mountain of freshly excavated, unnaturally dark earth. The most unnerving part was the silence from Thomas. After my cryptic email, he'd tried calling me once, a simple, non-committal check-in. I ignored it. Then, 2 weeks ago, I found him parked by the main gate, a rented luxury sedan gleaming in the afternoon sun. He wasn't even trying to hide. He was just sitting there watching the trucks go in and out. I stopped my pickup and walked over. He rolled down his window, and the city-sharp facade was finally cracked. He looked pale, almost afraid. "What did you do, Alex?" he asked, not in his usual accusatory tone, but with a genuine tremor of fear. "I saved the farm," I snapped back, instantly defensive. "I took care of the debt you called an anchor. $2 million, Thomas. Clean. Cash. It's an easement. Conservation and access. They can't build houses." He stared past me at the drilling rig, which looked impossibly huge against the horizon. $2 million for 50 acres of marginal woodland, Alex. That's $40,000 an acre. For a conservation easement? No developer pays that much unless they're hiding something exponentially more valuable. His financial mind was already working the angles, and the conclusion he reached was terrifyingly logical. Aetheria Development Corp doesn't do conservation, Alex. They build the unseen infrastructure that keeps the modern world running. Data lines, fiber optic hubs, secured underground facilities, and they buy silence with a very specific price tag. Did you read the fine print about what they're allowed to extract, or what subterranean layers they can access? I hadn't. Not really. The agreement was hundreds of pages of dense legal jargon, written by a team of lawyers I couldn't afford to counter. I had skimmed the summary, focused on the $2 million, and the promise that the farm itself would be untouched. I had been so desperate to escape the bank's deadline that I had signed away my curiosity and possibly my safety for a price. "It's not too late," Thomas said, his voice dropping low, his eyes darting to the security guard's hut. "I've been running Aetheria's financials through my old contacts. They're a shell, Alex. A very big, very well-funded shell, but their holdings are deliberately opaque. They've been buying up land adjacent to government testing sites, decommissioned military installations, and, get this, old abandoned underground infrastructure all across the Midwest." He leaned closer, and the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. "This isn't about conservation or geology. I think you sold them the perfect location for something they want kept completely secret. Something they can drill for and secure deep underground, right beneath our house." I felt sick. My throat was dry. "What are you saying, Thomas? What did I sell?" "I don't know," he confessed, shaking his head slowly. "But I think we need to find out. And I think that $2 million wasn't for the easement. It was hush money. And you just spent it all fixing a barn roof." He told me he was flying back to the city that night, but would call in a favor from an old contact, an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate malfeasance and shady land deals. "Whatever they're doing," Thomas said, his voice hard with resolve, "they want it hidden. And the only way to beat a corporation like this is to shine a light on them." He drove away, leaving me alone with the sickening realization that I hadn't saved the farm. I'd converted it into a high-security industrial site, a literal ticking time bomb, all to spite my brother's accusation of debt. The debt was gone, but the fear that replaced it was priceless. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of having signed away more than just 50 acres. Maybe I'd signed away the truth. The silence after Thomas left was louder than the drilling. It was a suffocating quiet that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. His fear was contagious. Thomas, the cold, hyper-rational financial analyst, was genuinely spooked, and that was far more disturbing than a simple corporate land grab. I started to see the farm differently. The picturesque 50 acres, now cordoned off and guarded, wasn't just my property. It was a cage. I was living next to a secret, and the silence I'd paid for with my debt relief was rapidly becoming toxic. I tried to ignore it. I went back to the fields, forcing myself to focus on the tangible, honest work of farming. But the rhythmic thump-thump-thump from the deep drill rig was an inescapable metronome counting down to some unknown disaster. Every afternoon, the security team, looking more and more like a private army, would change shifts. They never spoke, they never waved, they just watched. Their watch wasn't just over the fence, it felt like it was over me. Then, the strangeness escalated. The workers on the site began to follow a schedule that defied logic. Instead of working straight through the day, they would drill furiously for 8 hours. Then, around 3 p.m., they would suddenly, completely stop. The silence that followed was unnerving, total, immediate, and deep. It was during these quiet hours that I started noticing the air. Not the usual smell of dust and hay, but a faint, metallic odor, like ozone or a welder's torch, carried on the breeze from the easement. It was subtle, but distinct, and it only ever happened during the hours they weren't drilling. I remembered Thomas's words, something they can drill for and secure deep underground. What if they weren't drilling for something? What if they were drilling to put something in? The idea was insane, but it explained the high security, the opaque financials, and the exorbitant price. An underground repository, a secure vault, maybe even an experimental lab, hidden deep beneath the undisturbed bedrock of the Colonial Farm. My brother finally called a week later. His contact, the journalist named Sarah, was good. Too good. Thomas had given her the bare minimum, the property records, the Aetheria shell company name, and the shocking $2 million easement price. Sarah's initial findings were alarming. Aetheria Development Corp wasn't just a shell. It was a black hole of corporate funding, receiving massive, non-itemized grants channeled through a Department of Defense subcontractor specializing in secure geological stabilization and long-term material storage. Did you hear that, Alex? Thomas's voice was tight over the phone. Long-term material storage. This isn't a data center. This isn't even a pipeline. They are burying something. And the DoD connection means it's classified and probably dangerous. That night, I did something incredibly stupid, reckless, and yet completely necessary. I had to know what was under my feet. I waited until 2 a.m. when the security lights were bright, but the guards' patrol rhythm was predictable. I knew the old creek bed like the back of my hand, and I knew a way through the thickest part of the hedge line along the fence that wasn't covered by the main floodlights. With a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters and a heart hammering against my ribs, I slipped into the easement. The silence inside the compound was absolute, yet heavy with potential energy. The metallic scent was overpowering here. The main access point was a gigantic circular shaft illuminated from within by a sickly, pale yellow light. It wasn't a drill hole, it was a ventilation shaft, maybe 80 feet in diameter, leading straight down into the earth. Around the rim of the shaft, I saw massive sealed containers. They looked like standardized shipping crates, but they were made of a dull, heavy lead-gray material. They were waiting to be lowered. I crept closer, hiding behind a stack of unused drilling pipe. I couldn't see any guards, only automated thermal cameras, which I knew I had to avoid. But then I heard voices, muffled and low, coming from the shaft entrance. I pressed myself against the cold steel, straining to hear. A man, Hayes, the project manager, was arguing with someone far below. The voice from below was distorted, but Hayes' side of the conversation was clear. "Look, the schedule is tight, Dr. Chen. We can't risk surface contamination. We stabilize the core samples first, then the next 2 storage units go down at dawn. No exceptions. This bedrock layer must hold the containment field for the next 300 years. Containment field. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't storage for grain or old records. This was the burial site for something that required a containment field. Something dangerous enough that the Department of Defense was involved, paying millions to a shadowy corporation to keep it secure, hundreds of feet below my ancestors' farm. I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling, and managed to snap 3 blurry photos of the massive metal crates before the sound of a distant engine forced me to move. I scrambled back toward the fence, leaving the cutters behind in my panic, convinced the metal scent was clinging to my clothes. When I finally tumbled back over the hedge onto my own safe side of the property line, I lay there in the cool grass, hyperventilating. I hadn't just saved the farm, I had unwittingly signed the lease on a covert nuclear or biological storage facility, a geological vault that needed to be secured for 3 centuries. Thomas was right. The $2 million wasn't the price of an easement, it was the price of my complicity and my silence. And now, armed with blurry pictures of lead-gray crates, I knew the stakes were terrifyingly high. The debt was gone, but the danger had just become existential. The next call wasn't to Thomas, it was to Sarah, the journalist. I needed to leverage this information before Aetheria realized I'd seen the crates. The next morning, the farm felt less like home and more like a surveillance state. I scrubbed my boots and jeans with industrial soap, paranoid about tracking any of the metallic dust into the house. My head was ringing with 2 phrases: containment field and 300 years. I realized I hadn't just saved the farm, I had mortgaged my bloodline's future to a secret federal project. If Thomas was right, and I now believed him utterly, the $2 million wasn't a profit. It was the initial bribe, the cost of the first wave of silence. I didn't call Thomas. I called Sarah, the investigative journalist. I used an old disposable flip phone purchased in a neighboring town weeks ago for entirely different, less apocalyptic reasons. Her voice on the line was sharp and professional. I didn't mince words. I told her the title of the easement, the price, the shell company, and the DoD subcontractor. Then I told her what I saw: the razor wire, the military-grade security, the massive ventilation shaft, and the lead-gray shipping crates awaiting burial, which I now strongly suspected contained some form of long-term hazardous waste. Sarah was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, the professional veneer was gone. Alex, Aetheria Development is what's known as a ghost corporation. They exist specifically to funnel dark money into black site projects. Your description, the deep core drilling, the security, the containment field reference, it all screams highly classified, high-level hazardous storage. Possibly nuclear, possibly a next-generation bioweapon research byproduct. Something no established facility wants to touch, so they bury it deep in private land, using the easement as legal cover. She explained the mechanism. Easements are harder to challenge than full-sale deeds, especially when coupled with restrictive clauses protecting critical national infrastructure. The $2 million was a strategic investment. It prevented me from selling to a real developer who might expose the site, and it made the local authorities unlikely to investigate a landowner who had just solved a massive financial crisis. It bought Aetheria an isolated, geologically stable burial ground right under the noses of a quiet rural community. Sarah advised me on a strategy that was both brilliant and terrifying. She couldn't publish anything yet. My blurry photos were circumstantial, and Aetheria would simply bury the evidence and launch a crushing defamation lawsuit against me, citing the non-disclosure clauses of the easement. We needed proof of what was in those crates. "You need to get closer, Alex," she whispered, the danger implicit in her tone. "I need proof of their contents, a manifest, a label, anything that identifies what they are storing for the next 3 centuries." Over the next few days, I became a spy on my own land. I studied Hayes, the project manager. I watched the guards, noticing their shift changes, their blind spots, and, most importantly, the brief window when the massive crane was used to lower the crates into the shaft. This happened every 3rd dawn, just before the full sun rose, when the night shift was exhausted and the day shift was just arriving. My chance came on a Thursday morning. I had been up all night, nerves frayed, drinking stale coffee. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump had stopped, signaling the 3 a.m. cease work. I watched the sky turn that bruised, inky color before dawn. At 5:15 a.m., the crane lumbered to life, its massive shadow stretching across the farm. A new crate, larger than the others, was secured beneath the crane's hook. The wind had picked up, and a sudden brief gust whipped through the valley. It caught the attention of the 2 guards assigned to the main gate. They turned their backs for a fraction of a second to adjust their coats. That was the only invitation I needed. I sprinted across the pasture, hitting the perimeter fence near a dead zone I'd identified earlier. This time, I didn't cut the wire. I scrambled under the lowest rung of the fence, risking lacerations, and landed silently on the dark, damp earth inside the compound. I kept low, using the stacked drilling pipes for cover, moving towards the new crate. It was sitting on a hydraulic lift, waiting for the crane operator to get the all clear. The metallic smell was now laced with something acrid, almost chemically sharp. I crept up to the side of the container. It was smooth, dark, and utterly featureless, save for a small, weatherproof panel on the side, near the base. This panel was open. I risked a glance inside. It wasn't a warning label or a manifest. It was a dense array of glowing green and red indicator lights surrounding a central control port. A small screen displayed a series of complex alphanumeric codes and a single, terrifying phrase flashing intermittently: core integrity, degrading. I took 2 quick, clear photos of the screen with the flip phone. The moment the phone flashed, a voice bellowed from the crane platform, "Hey, who's there?" It was Hayes. He had seen the reflection of the screen on the crane's windshield. He was scrambling down the ladder, shouting into his radio. Pure adrenaline-fueled panic took over. I didn't try to go back the way I came. I ran in the opposite direction, toward the sheer drop-off of the creek bed, the deepest part of the old woods. I heard the crackle of the radios and the pounding feet of the security guards behind me. They knew I was trespassing. More importantly, they now knew I had seen the flashing word, degrading. The $2 million easement hadn't bought Aetheria silence. It had bought them a target, and that target was me. I had the proof, but now I had a private security army on my trail, and my only escape was into the dark, tangled undergrowth of the farm I'd fought so hard to save. I ran. I didn't think about the wire cutters I'd left behind the first time, or the blurry photos I'd taken. All that mattered was the flip phone clutched in my hand, containing the images of that terrifying, flashing message: core integrity, degrading. That phrase confirmed every fear Thomas and Sarah had voiced. This wasn't secure storage. It was a ticking time bomb, and I had unwittingly paved the road for its placement. The old creek bed, the very stretch of land Aetheria had paid $2 million for, became my shield. It was a tangle of ancient, thorny undergrowth, hidden springs, and slippery shale rocks, impossible terrain for men in heavy security boots. I scrambled down the embankment, the sounds of shouting and crashing brush echoing behind me. Hayes and his guards were fast, organized, and furious. They were no longer just enforcing security, they were hunting me. I knew the woods offered temporary cover, but eventually they would track me. My only chance was to cross the boundary, the invisible line separating the restricted easement from the main farm. Once I reached the old stone wall that bordered the cornfields, I was technically on my side of the property, but I had no illusion that a simple property line would deter a DOD-funded operation. As I burst through the final line of trees, gasping for air, the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the farm in a harsh, unforgiving light. I saw my pickup truck parked near the barn. If I could reach it, I could drive to safety. But before I could take 2 steps, a figure emerged from the shadow of the tractor shed. It was Thomas. He was standing there, not in his usual city suit, but in work jeans and a heavy jacket, looking utterly out of place, holding a rusty old crowbar, one of Dad's tools. His face was a mask of cold fury and genuine terror. "I got worried after your last call with Sarah," he explained, his voice strained. "I drove straight here. I was waiting for you near the house." He didn't need to ask what happened. The sight of me, scratched and bleeding, with the sound of men crashing through the woods behind me, was enough. "They're coming," I managed to pant out. "Containment breach. I saw the screen. We need to leave now." Thomas didn't hesitate. He pointed the crowbar toward the back of the barn. "The storm cellar. We can go through the old tunnel. It comes out by the silo, down by the county road. We can make a run for it." The cellar wasn't for storms. It was a relic from the Prohibition-era, a damp, narrow tunnel our great-grandfather had used to smuggle moonshine. It was a dusty family legend, and I hadn't thought about it in years. We ducked inside the barn just as Hayes and 2 guards emerged from the tree line, shouting and pointing. They saw the open door of the tractor shed, and their immediate assumption was that I was trying to hotwire a tractor. They sprinted toward the shed, giving us the critical 30 seconds we needed. We scrambled down the narrow, rickety steps into the black, damp cellar beneath the farmhouse. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. Thomas pulled a heavy wooden crate aside, revealing the low, arched entrance to the tunnel, barely wide enough for one person. "Go, Alex. You have the phone. That's the only thing that matters," Thomas urged, his voice heavy with urgency. I crawled in first, the dirt scraping against my jacket. As I pushed forward, Thomas followed, dragging the heavy crate back into position to hide the entrance. We hadn't gone 10 feet when we heard the sound of heavy boots upstairs. They had realized their mistake. Hayes was shouting, his voice muffled by the earth above us. "He's not here! Check the foundation! Check the cellar! Find the access point, damn it!" Suddenly, the air pressure in the tunnel changed. A low, unsettling hum vibrated through the earth, a sound I recognized instantly as the deep drill working again. Only this time, it was closer, directly beneath the house. "They're drilling," Thomas muttered, his voice a strained whisper. "They're trying to flood or collapse something to cover their tracks. They know we have proof." We scrambled faster, pushing through the suffocating darkness. The sound of the underground drilling grew into a terrifying, sustained roar. It felt like the entire world was shaking. Then the ceiling of the tunnel ahead of us cracked. A plume of dust and fine, dry dirt rained down, followed by a thick, gray liquid that smelled metallic and acrid. The same odor I'd smelled at the containment site, only concentrated and potent. "Oh God, they hit something!" Thomas choked out, pushing me forward. "Alex, hurry!" The drilling stopped. The silence that followed was even more paralyzing than the noise. Then, a low, guttural groan emanated from the bedrock, and the entire floor of the tunnel shifted violently. The house above us, the farm I had risked everything to save, was collapsing. We burst out of the far end of the tunnel, tumbling into the cool morning air by the silo. We didn't stop to look back. We ran, blindly, towards the county road. I heard the distant, desperate wail of sirens. Not police, but emergency response, the sound of a major, undeniable incident. I had the phone, the evidence of Aetheria's terrifying secret, but the price of that evidence was the destruction of the Colonial Farm, the place I called home, and maybe, just maybe, the integrity of the ground beneath the entire town. I looked at Thomas, covered in dirt and fear, and I knew the war had just begun. The fight to expose Aetheria would be brutal, but now it was personal. We didn't stop running until we reached the main county road, collapsing behind a dilapidated billboard advertising a long-gone local fair. From that vantage point, we could see the Colonial Farm, or rather, we could see the aftermath. A plume of unnatural heavy dust was hanging over the main house and the central barn, where the ground had clearly given way. Emergency vehicles, marked with a distinctive hazmat symbol I'd never seen before, were converging on the area, not with flashing lights, but with a terrifying, silent urgency. Hayes' security team was nowhere in sight. They had vanished, melting back into the corporate shadows from which they came. Thomas gripped my shoulder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "The house. It's gone," he whispered, his voice thick with loss, the financier's composure finally dissolving into genuine grief. He'd called it a debt, but seeing 300 years of family history reduced to a pile of rubble clearly shattered him. "The $2 million bought me time, Thomas," I said, my voice hollow. "But it also bought them the perfect cover story, a tragic, unpreventable collapse of an old foundation. No one will suspect classified material." I pulled out the flip phone, the screen still showing the terrifying image of the core integrity, degrading warning. "This is it. This is the only leverage we have left." We hitched a ride with a bewildered local couple heading towards the neighboring city. I called Sarah immediately, keeping the conversation brief and coded. I told her I had the proof, and I told her the exact coordinates of the farm and the nature of the catastrophe, the ground destabilization, and the likely release of whatever toxic material they were trying to bury. Her response was instant and decisive. "Meet me at the Secure News Bureau downtown. Don't use your cards, don't use your real names, they will be looking for you." The next 48 hours were a blur of adrenaline, fear, and high-stakes journalism. Sarah and her editorial team confirmed our worst suspicions. The material being stored wasn't just nuclear waste. It was a highly volatile byproduct from a failed experimental energy project, something so unstable that the only solution was burial deep underground in a seismically stable area. Aetheria had chosen the Colonial Farm based on old, forgotten geological surveys. The $2 million easement was a perfectly calculated insurance policy against interference. They hadn't expected me to care enough to look. The photos I had were the definitive piece of evidence. The timestamp proved they were taken before the engineered collapse. It proved Aetheria knew the material was degrading and chose to bury it anyway. The fact that Thomas and I survived the collapse only added explosive power to the narrative. It wasn't just a story about land. It was a story about corporate malfeasance, government secrecy, and reckless endangerment of an entire community. Sarah's team published the exposé on a Saturday afternoon. The headline, based on my brother's initial cynical assessment, was simple and devastating. The $2 million debt, how a colonial farm became a toxic black site. It included my narrative, Thomas's financial analysis of the shell company, and the damning photos from the control panel. The immediate fallout was cataclysmic. Aetheria's stock plummeted. The Department of Defense subcontractor was immediately placed under federal investigation. But more importantly, the environmental protection agencies were forced to acknowledge the site and the threat. The Colonial Farm was now ground zero for a major classified cleanup operation. Thomas and I were called to testify before a congressional committee. Standing there, in a borrowed suit, talking about containment fields and subterranean access, I felt 1,000 miles away from the soil and the tractors. When asked why I signed the easement, I told the truth. I was desperate. I was trying to save my family's legacy from financial debt. I didn't realize I was trading a financial debt for a debt to the public trust. In the end, we lost the farm entirely. The government, citing national security and environmental safety, seized the 50-acre easement and the entire remaining property under eminent domain. But the legal battle, spearheaded by Sarah's pro bono lawyers, resulted in a landmark settlement. We received a full, fair market value for the entire property, minus the original debts, which they paid off. More significantly, the remaining money, substantial though it was put into a trust to fund the long-term environmental monitoring of the site and the surrounding community. Thomas didn't go back to finance. The experience had fundamentally altered him. He now manages the environmental trust, dedicating his expertise to ensuring Aetheria and the DoD are held accountable for the cleanup. And me? I took a portion of the settlement and bought a small plot of land 50 miles north, far from any geological anomalies or corporate interests. It's a manageable size, just enough to work with my hands, and this time, the legacy is one of survival, not debt. The Colonial Farm is gone. It is now a restricted, heavily monitored national containment site. But every time I smell the rich, honest scent of freshly turned earth, I know one thing. I lost the farm, but I won the truth. The $2 million from the easement was the cost of a terrible mistake, but it was also the ignition point for a war we had to fight. We fought it, not with money or tractors, but with a blurry photograph and the simple refusal to keep a dangerous corporate secret buried. The debt is settled, but the story of how the land fought back is just beginning.